Welcome everybody. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Peter Moyser, and I am the Dean of Leeds University Business School. So it's my great pleasure to see so many people here, and also the collaborations that I know are going on and hopefully will bring forth something worth having. So this is the closing plenary for the Festival Ideas 2019. And I hope you've had a good opening plenary session, and you had the parallel sessions afterwards. And the topics look really interesting, and I'm sorry I missed some of those. And I'm also sorry I can't stay for this plenary, I've got another meeting, but I'm glad I can be here for this part. So what we're hoping with this, as I'm sure you've been told, is to showcase the research in Leeds University Business School and to just demonstrate the sort of wide-ranging topics that are undertaken here. And obviously what we're hoping is that at the end of it all, there'll be fruits of collaboration between people here from the industry and also our own academics, and we can take things forward and make an impact, because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do, is to make an impact and help improve business in the UK. Okay, now I've been told, this is where I get very technical, that at this stage, I'd like to direct you all to pages 6 and 7 of the delegate pack, which apparently have got great photographs. I've not had a chance to check this out yet. They've got great photographs and information on each of the business school speakers that you've heard from today. And then if you've been inspired by the sessions you've attended, or perhaps you wanted to attend them all but couldn't be in two places at once, then I'm here to encourage you all to get in touch with our talented researchers and continue the conversation. So please, 6 and 7 is where the magic data is. And if you have any questions about the research taking place at the business school, and little brackets here, we do have over 200 researchers in the business school. So there's a lot of going on, not necessarily the ones you've just seen, but there's more here as well. Please contact the Business School Research Office, which again, their details are on page 9 of the pack. So if you want to investigate the pack, you will find all this wonderful information, and you'll be able to get emails to them, ping it to them. Now, you don't want to hear from me because we've got quite an interesting plenary lined up. So I'm going to close my little bit now, and I will close the final formal part. But just to remind you all that there will be a networking wine reception afterwards, so it's worth staying on, to be held in the Nexus atrium. So, my job now is finished. I've welcomed you. Very pleased so many could be here, and hope for the future. And now I'd like to pass you over to Martin Stowe, the Nexus Director, who will tell us more about what the future holds for research collaboration across the university, and will also introduce the speakers. So thanks very much, everybody, and hand you over to Martin. Thank you.
So good afternoon, and it's great to see so many of you here. As Peter mentioned, my name's Dr. Martin Stowe, and I'm the director of Nexus. I normally say I'm a newly appointed director, but I've been here at the university now for just over a year. And my background is commercial, so I've run startup businesses. I've also worked for multinational corporations as well. And I'm really delighted to welcome you here today. I'm really excited about the speakers that we have and the conversation that we're going to hopefully enable as a result of the presentations. Before I say anything else though, and I've been instructed, I mustn't forget this, but we are not planning to have a fire alarm today. So this is my, as director with responsibility for the building, from a health and safety perspective, we're not expected to have a fire alarm. So clearly, if the alarm goes off, please just make your way to the back of the lecture theatre. I'm not going to do the hand actions either. So let me just talk a little bit about Nexus and what we're trying to do through Nexus. So Nexus is an initiative which is part of the business engagement framework of the University of Leeds. And it's really an initiative which is all about making it easier for businesses to be able to connect with the world-class academic expertise, talent and skills and facilities and equipment that we have here in Leeds. And we do that by actually having an engagement team that actually are the first point of contact. So all new inquiries at the university will come through that engagement team. So it makes it easy in terms of connecting with the university. That engagement team act as a brokerage service. So they have commercial, sector level experience, and they will then help have the right conversations with the right academics and researchers to be able to connect and work with the university. And I'm hoping, as I say, part of the presentations today, and these presentations are almost a case study in some ways of how businesses, and in this case a couple of small startup businesses, are working really effectively with the university. So I'm hoping that the case study and the conversation we have as a result of that will give you a good indication of what Nexus is about. Nexus, though, is also about this wonderful facility. So this facility, which is a £40 million investment by the university, is really is all about enabling collaborations. So it's about enabling both informal and formal collaborations, and collaborations between researchers and business. And we're already seeing that's starting to happen in a lot of cases, which is great to see. Nexus as a front door for the university also is really building momentum, and since the team have been up and running, we've taken over 300 new inquiries through Nexus into the university. So this is quite a landmark event though for us. This is the first external event that we're holding in the building. So I'm really proud and to be standing here and actually welcoming, as I say, this event. And we're absolutely delighted to be partnering with the business school, because this is exactly the type of event where we have businesses and external organisations attending, as well as internal researchers that we want to promote through Nexus. So let me just take a moment just to introduce our speakers. And then I'll ask each of them just to give probably a 2 to 3 minute introduction about their background, and then we'll just kick onto the presentations themselves. Could I also just ask you, though, to think about questions, because what we would like to do is to make this interactive, and our plan is to probably spend about 25 minutes before we close to actually have an opportunity for questions. So as the presenters are actually speaking, please, as I say, think about questions. I probably should say nothing. You can ask any question, do you think, within reason? So please feel free to do that. So let me just introduce firstly Barry Singleton. So Barry is the VP of a small startup called IMC, and they are leaders in artificial intelligence, and I'm sure Barry will explain more about the company. I'd like to also introduce Dr. David McKee, who's from the university, but also is the CTO of, again, an early stage startup called Slingshot Simulations. And I'd also like to introduce Dr. Alicia Piotropakovic, I knew I'd struggle with that, who is a Wellcome Trust ISS Fellow, working within the Leeds Institute of Medical Education. So without further ado, Barry.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, Alan. We've called our presentation today A Tale of Two Cities because essentially that's what it is. And I work for IMC, which is a Canadian company, and we've developed a startup company, incubated a startup company that's going to be based here in Nexus, which I'm really pleased about. So, hey up. I am a Yorkshire lad, as you can probably tell from my accent. I'd like to thank Alicia for choosing the title, and it's more than just a pun, and I think I'm going to actually enlighten and educate Alicia a little bit with this as well, because according to my notes here, in A Tale of Two Cities, Dickens asserts his belief in the possibility of resurrection and transformation both on a personal level and on a societal level. And though Dickens sees the French Revolution as a great symbol of transformation and resurrection, he emphasises that its violent means were ultimately antithetical to its end, which is a bit of a mouthful. I'm hoping that's not analogous to the aftermath of Brexit and that we're going to see all kinds of horrible stuff going on, which is probably the worst example of collaboration in living memory, I think you might agree. So, a little bit about me. I was born in Leeds. I did graduate from the University of Leeds in 1998, which seems a long time ago now. That's pretty much where my academic qualifications finish. So it's a real pleasure to be able to share the stage with two esteemed and very well qualified academics like David and Alicia. I play for North Leeds Cricket Club, and the reason I kind of mention that is because I think I've learned a lot about how to collaborate and how to be part of a team from playing cricket. I've played at 4 different clubs, I've travelled all over the country playing it, and I think that's definitely informed my character and my ability to kind of collaborate. Now they do say that speakers require no introduction, and that's why I'm trying to give you a bit of an introduction. If you'd have Googled me before you came here, you might have seen that I play cricket, and you wouldn't have seen much about my entrepreneurial prowess or exploits. So, IMC. IMC is based in Toronto. We're about 100 people across 4 different continents, and we're a premier business partner for IBM and IBM Watson's lead partner in Canada and the Caribbean, curiously. We're a combination of marketing people, psychologists, behavioural economists and technologists. So we build platforms and websites. As I say, we've also incubated Scaled Insights, which is a behavioural AI startup. Hello, how are you doing? I know we've got one Canadian in the room, and I'm looking right. Is anybody else from Canada, or has anybody else ever visited Canada in this room? So there's quite a few people been there. I think you probably agree it's a very liberal, open-minded, very welcoming, very friendly, very diverse, very inclusive city. And I think that's where you can draw some similar parallels with Leeds. I think it has a similar feel, even though it's about 10 times bigger. I had a pretty interesting experience when I went to Canada, as well as meeting some very, very clever and very influential people. I spent a couple of days at a naturist camp out on the way up to Lake Simcoe, and actually just on the end of Lake Simcoe is a city called Barrie, which is why I probably felt quite at home. I didn't just go out there to go and visit a naturist camp, and I'm happily to share my experiences with one day, apart from getting locked out when it was -17, which was a bit scary, as you can imagine. So I spent time out there, and I learnt from Dr. Brian Kugelman, who's he's a specialist in the psychology of digital behaviour change. I learnt from a guy called Dave Howlett, who's developed his own philosophy of likability. He calls it the Real Human Being Organisation. And I learned about evolutionary psychology from a guy called Mark Bowden. Mark Bowden, he taught me about the 4 different default positions there are when you meet somebody for the first time. They are like, dislike, complete indifference, or potential mate. And I'll leave that one floating out there, depending on, you can decide which one I fall into of those categories. I also learned about big data analytics and how it's applied in banking and financial services from my colleague Richard Goyder, who's a Brit. He's a graduate of INSEAD, and he's our head of data science back at IMC. So IMC's got a lot of different clients. We work with Visit Orlando, we work with banks, we work with insurance companies, and they use technology and behavioural economics to provide a deep understanding of the neuroscience of displaying, reading, understanding, and learning to create websites, apps, and digitals. And I got into this in a quite curious way, and I'm really pleased that we have at least a couple of people who share my hair colour in this room, because ultimately that's how I got this job. And it might sound a bit weird, but the guy that I'm kind of saying something off to the side to there is my friend. He's my mentor. He's a force of nature. He's a really amazing person. And that's Stuart Sherman, who's the CEO of IMC and the founder of Scaled Insights, which is our startup that we're going to locate here. That's at the world's largest redhead festival, and you can see my t-shirt that I'm wearing. I created this clothing brand for gingers called Ginger with Attitude, and I was going to change the world. I was going to clothe all the gingers of the world. And it never really quite took off. I think I got up to 70,000 Facebook followers. And, it kind of pays for a holiday every year, but basically that's how I got to meet Stu. And I'll be completely honest with you, before I met Stu, if somebody had said the word algorithm to me, then that's the kind of thing that would have been going through my mind. yeah. 7 years later, I met Stu 7 years ago. We became friends, and then 7 years later, we're on the bridge over the River Aire there with Leeds' tallest building right behind us, which is not as impressive as Toronto's skyline, clearly, but there we are. And it's led to me collaborating and going around the university, meeting some incredibly smart people, and learning an awful lot from people like David Hogg, Vanya Dimitrova, Gareth Frith, Tamsin Treasure. There's so many people that I've been thoroughly welcomed into this university by. I look at David McKee, and he's become a firm friend over the last 18 months to 2 years as well. And before meeting David McKee, if somebody had said graph theory to me, then I might have thought about somebody had kind of developed a mathematical formula that understood why Steffi Graf was winning so many Wimbledon championships. So we bring that forward, and here we are. We're setting up Scaled Insights. We won the best AI company at the Global AI Awards in December 2018. It was conceived in Canada, and it's very much born in Leeds. And what do we do? There's a brilliant conversation analyst called Dr. Liz Stowe, who's at Loughborough University, and she says, if somebody says to you, what exactly is it that you do? She calls it a first mover. And what do we do? Well, we look at big data, and big data is all about the act of studying people's past actions to try and predict their future actions. AI is helping us to predict more quickly, more accurately, and more affordably than ever before. And if you've not read it, I recommend that you read a book called Prediction Machines, I think it's the simple economics of AI, and it's by a Toronto-based academic called Avi Goldfarb, and it's a really, really interesting book. We're also looking at human insights and how to influence people and how to motivate them in various aspects of their life. What we're able to do is we're able to create an impression, a fingerprint, a snapshot of somebody from the language that they use. And the language that you use essentially leaks your personality, and personality is what motivates you. So I'll give you a little quick example of what it might look like. That's me. You kind of see me standing here for a good few minutes now. Whether you agree or not that I seem to be quite open and quite agreeable, or conscientious or not, I don't know. But what we're essentially doing is turning personality into numbers. And once you've got personality in numerical form, then you can measure and compare them against each other. And what we're saying is that organisations have truckloads of big data, and they have human insights on the other side of this kind of great big gap, and we're able to bridge that gap between human insights and big data. We've been working on pilot projects in financial services, education, healthcare, and we're very interested in working with more academics and clinicians to look at how to use data better in order to motivate people to lose weight, to give up smoking, to adhere to their meds, and so much more. And it's also, we're looking at really personalising and individualising healthcare, training, personal development, could include sports coaching, and we've signed an agreement with the Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust in order to do these kind of data studies. So you may ask, why Leeds? I don't particularly like going to London. It's a bit of a pain, isn't it? Going on that tube is just really arduous and sickening and tiresome. I think Leeds has got this spirit of collaboration that really exudes from places like this, and as I say, I really am grateful to Martin and Harrison, who's not able to be here today, in Chelsea, the Nexus team, for all the help that they've given us as we try to kind of engage with academics on this journey. Leeds has got a really thriving digital sector, both the private and public, and we had the opportunity to meet Tom Reardon thanks to Leeson not so long ago. I think Leeds is a great place to do business for startups and for established companies. All roads do lead to Leeds in the UK. You know, we're literally slap bang in the middle of the country, so geographically we're placed perfectly. I think sharing the wisdom is quite important. I don't know how many people have been to the FinTech North events. Those guys are really doing an awful lot to kind of promote collaboration within the city. And of course, we've got a huge presence with the NHS here. I think it's 4 out of 5 NHS headquarters are based in Leeds. So Leeds is just a place that feels great for doing business and for this kind of academic and industrial collaboration. To give you a little snapshot of some of the people that we're collaborating with at the moment, we've done some work with Health Education England and the School of Computing, and Alicia is going to expand on that a little bit later in this piece. We've done an awful lot of collaboration with the School of Psychology. The Advanced Centre for Doctoral Training is a new innovation here at the University of Leeds, and Stuart, my CEO, has pledged to support a PhD when that all kind of kicks off later in the year. So really excited about that. We've been shortlisted to go on Propel YH, which is an NHS accelerator that's run by the Academic Health Science Network. So we haven't kind of guaranteed our place on that yet. There's a bit of work to do, but hopefully that'll add to our ability to kind of reach out to clinicians and academics who are interested in the type of data studies we're interested in. Yeah, these are the other people. So on Wednesday, I'm going to meet with Stefan Haas from the Choice Modelling Centre. That's hopefully going to be something that will bring some nice, interesting fruit for us. And really kind of that brings you to the end of my story. I've got so much more I could tell you, but I want to hand over to Alicia. And I imagine that talking about personality and talking about data, there's a few people are thinking a little bit sceptical about that. One thing I've become very familiar with since working with the university on these kind of projects are ensuring that we get ethics approval. And before I hand over to Alicia, I want to leave you this one slide and this one thought. It was originally The Only Way is Ginger. That was a t-shirt design that we did, but me and my friend did. But yeah, essentially, become very familiar with ethics approval processes. It's really important, whether you're talking about AI or whether you're talking about life in general. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alicia, and thank you very much for your time.
So now going from 100% ginger to only 20% ginger. My name is Alicja Piotrkowicz. I'm a researcher at the Leeds Institute of Medical Education, and by background I'm actually a linguist. And I was wondering if I have any linguists in the room. Oh no, sad face. But believe me, linguistics is so much fun. So I started off in linguistics, but then I transitioned into artificial intelligence and particularly natural language processing. I do applied artificial intelligence research now across a variety of disciplines, so currently mostly in education, particularly medical education, but I've also worked in applying AI methods to healthcare data and news data, which was my PhD. And today I'd like to talk to you about this collaboration that we're doing with IMC on a project with Health Education England, which is about supporting lifelong professional learning in healthcare at scale. So I'm sure you're very much aware of some of the challenges that NHS is facing, but I'm sure you've also heard about the disruptive nature of technology and how it can actually provide at least part of a solution. But according to the Topol review, which was commissioned by Health Education England and published just in January this year, in terms of actually preparing the UK healthcare workforce for this technological innovation and this kind of advancement in terms of technology in the healthcare system, there's this huge need for digital upskilling. And it's not a very simple matter, because I think we all know that NHS is this massive organisation. It's hugely diverse. So how do you actually provide training in terms of technology across the whole workforce? And actually I was in the session just before this one on human side of technological information, and the speakers mentioned the challenges and the opportunities that technology brings to the workforce in the UK. And I think within the NHS, it has its unique challenges. So we're working with Health Education England and IMC on what we think is at least part of the solution, which is a digital platform which will open personalised adaptive learning that would motivate and support the healthcare professionals across the NHS. And within the report, there's this quote by Professor Lukin about how professional lifelong learning is absolutely at the core of basically how we advance not just the NHS but the society as a whole. So it's not just enough to I don't know, learn in school or at the university and then you're done with it. Most, if not all, professions nowadays will actually require lifelong learning. But obviously, if you're a busy professional, you're not necessarily have all the spare time for learning activities. So the challenge is not just providing timely learning, but also actually motivating and supporting busy professionals in their professional development. So this is very much an ongoing project that we're doing. And it's really great that we were able to actually get 3 quite distinct perspectives for this. So Health Education England is giving us a lot of expert guidance about the realities of training and upskilling in the NHS. And they already have a very rich resource, a lot of online training, and through this project we want to enrich it and enhance it using behavioural AI. And my background in natural language processing kind of helps in translating from the purely AI side to how it could work in practice. How can you actually, based on those human insights, how do you translate it into a learning intervention? So we're working on that and it's going great. And it's been just a huge pleasure working with IMC. Well, I'll keep you posted. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I can't stand still, so I'll probably end up wandering around. Hopefully I won't end up behind your... I did ask the camera crew how far they could swivel the camera, so I might test them on that. Hopefully the next 5-10 minutes will actually capture a story of collaboration with at least 3 different faculties across the university, with I think at least 3, maybe even 5 different companies, most of whom you'll recognise, and show actually how that can result, in this case, in a spin-out from the university and in some quite high impact research. So my role is currently wearing 2 hats. I am a lead research fellow in the School of Computing, sponsored by the Royal Academy of Engineering, looking at how we commercialise simulation technologies in the space of big data and cloud computing. Previously, I've led the big data module in the School of Computing, which is always very interesting, given it's mostly attended by non-computer scientists and primarily economics students and so forth, who realise that, oh dear, they need to learn how to program Java. And they arrive in my lecture theatre and I have a 1-hour lecture to suddenly teach them Java. which is interesting. So I'm not going to teach you Java in 10 minutes. So we've already mentioned, Barry and Alicia have mentioned this collaboration already. So I was involved in that, providing a more consulting perspective on how to use the university's cloud infrastructure and IT infrastructure, something that we do every day, so they can use that for big data analytics. A slightly more interesting one that some of you may be slightly more familiar with or terrified by. So I led a collaboration with someone you've already heard from today, Ian Clacker, looking at how we can take cloud computing and distributed ledger and blockchain technology and use it to completely reinvent how we manage pensions, how we do it at scale, how we can automate, how we can take out a lot of the levels of bureaucracy, how we can introduce greater levels of transparency by using smart contracts and so forth. This was published last summer, which was a very interesting experience for me, coming in as a computer scientist and mathematician and suddenly having to learn how pensions work and not just trusting the pension body to do it for me. That was a very interesting few days, and I still don't fully understand it, even having written the papers about it and coded it all up. But this is a really great example of how you can collaborate across the university, even within the university. And this is quite a small one, but if we go beyond that, we can start bringing in corporates. So within the School of Computing, one of the biggest projects we've done over the last 6-7 years was with Jaguar Land Rover, where we spent over £1 million and over 20 PhD research years looking at how we do large-scale simulation and virtual prototyping across the entire supply chain. So how do we actually take the manufacturing and design process that Bosch might be doing somewhere in Germany, looking at how you design an electrical control unit for an engine? How do you look at how Dassault might be simulating the transmission system down in the south of France? And all of that data being transmitted and used in Coventry to design the cars that are on the road and ensuring that they're safe to drive. And then how do you do that in the world of autonomous vehicles where we don't have millions of hours of vehicles on the road? And how do we ensure that they're safe? The general answer to that is we don't know. How do we test these? How can we test all the scenarios? We've been looking for the last 7 years at how we can integrate all these together. This was an interesting collaboration between 7 universities in the UK as well as Jaguar Land Rover, 2 departments here within the university, both School of Computing and the Institute for Transport Studies. We've got Virtuosity Centre for city simulation with our driving simulator. We've also got a truck simulator and a pedestrian sim, which you can actually go and walk around and have full immersive reality. It's quite an interesting experience. Looking at how you might cross a dual carriageway. How do you walk across it when you see it's a self-driving car with no driver? You know, in Leeds, I think most pedestrians assume cars are going to stop, and they just walk anyway. Now, if you see it's an autonomous vehicle and you know it has to stop, is that going to just make it worse? And that means you'll never get anywhere in Leeds? And it's hard enough getting in, or it's hard enough driving off campus just after a lecture theatre finishes. And you have however many thousand students going across Woodhouse Lane. It's fun. But if you see that car is going to stop, are you not going to just walk in front of it? How can you program a car to force its way forward and to, in essence, force the pedestrians to not get in its way? But doesn't that mean there's a risk of running them over? Well, it can't do that because it might run them over. No one knows. So how can we explore that? How can we use the facilities Leeds has? Leeds is one of a kind. That big simulator you see there is one of 5 in the world. And there's only one other in the UK. There's a couple in China and one in the US. So really there's a great opportunity for collaboration here, taking the engineering capability we have across the Faculty of Engineering, some of the more legal issues that I've just described, who's liable for that, and then understanding how we would implement that in a real world before we're actually allowed to put a car on the road with our driver. Take a slightly more interesting approach, a world that I've come from, looking at data centers. So we, as computer scientists, spend a lot of time working on computers, but we also spend an awful lot of time looking at how they run. Back in 2013, data centers accounted for over 3% of global carbon emissions. Today, that is probably approximately 6 to 7%, which is horrific. I expect if we put data centers, it'd be one of the top contributors to global carbon emissions. Unfortunately, it's not just one company, so you can't list it like that. Concrete is one of the other things that's up there as well. So how do we understand those? And we saw a few years ago Google buying DeepMind in order to look and learn using AI how to more efficiently manage their data center to bring it from approximately 50% efficiency to over 80%. Over 50% of the cost of running a data center is electricity and primarily cooling, because these things get hot. These things get very hot. So over the last 5 years, we've been looking at how we model these not just at the software architecture, but at the mechanical architecture. How do we look at the thermodynamics, how fluids move through them, and how are the business processes affecting this as to what they're allowed to run on these? What happens when everyone wants to stream the fireworks on New Year's Eve? Does that all run on one server rack and that just blows up? Or do we distribute that across the country? What's more efficient? How we understand how people are using these, this software-society interaction is really, really important, because it can have huge impacts on how we understand these things. This work was done with Alibaba in China and was used to analyze one of their data centers. They have the biggest data centers in the world, over 15,000 servers, which is huge. You can't actually imagine how big that actually is till you go and see it. And earmuffs don't work. It is loud. It is really loud. You're not allowed to be in there for very long. And understanding, well, actually, that server's at the top of a rack of 40 servers, therefore it's hotter. Relatively simple, but the software doesn't normally account for where that is. Very simple things that need to be built into how we understand and design these things that typically require multidisciplinary approaches. In this case, mechanical engineers talking to computer scientists. This work was part of the first of its kind. We published this in December. This was the first holistic data center simulation that combined both the software architecture and the mechanical engineer. It was quite an exciting moment for us. When we presented this, some researchers from New York had presented just before us and presented their vision of doing this. And then we presented right after them and said, and here's the result, which was pretty nice. They said they were going to get there in 2 years' time. So great, we're 2 years ahead. This is, I will admit, I still don't understand the maths of this. I don't understand how fans work. I don't understand how heat sinks work. Too complicated, but that requires collaboration. It makes the pensions math look simple. Another collaboration that we've done here at Leeds, and all of this has led to Slingshot Simulations, which I'll come on to in a moment. So with Rolls-Royce, starting back in around 2011, and we reached a climax in around 2013, 2014, we were looking at real-time engine health monitoring. So an aircraft engine, we're flying from Heathrow to Singapore. That's a 12-hour flight. How much data gets generated from that? It can be up to a terabyte of data per engine for a 12-hour flight. That data must be analysed to a satisfactory degree, whatever that is, before that plane is allowed to take off again. How many engines does Rolls-Royce have in operation? Tens of thousands. Today, the service contracts that Rolls-Royce provide to go with those account for over 50% of its global revenue. So actually being able to analyze these and understand and identify faults before they happen is really, really important. I think Boeing is a great example of where this hasn't quite gone right, and why this collaborations with universities or independent bodies is very important. Enough said on that one. And more importantly, one piece of advice, if you're pitching to aeronautics, don't use this picture. It doesn't go down too well, apparently. They want to know that the thing won't fail. They don't want to see the pictures of when it will. But understanding all the failure cases and using simulation to understand those, what are the processes involved, whether it is understanding what happens when the captain needs to go for a loo break, and what, in that situation, suddenly they need someone to be able to reach a button on that side of the cockpit to the other side. and they don't have, how far can you reach? That could be a very simple scenario that might never happen. But actually understanding that requires both understanding the software, but understanding the physical layout. Collaborative research, this could be a train. Here at Leeds, we've got the High Speed Rail Institute. We're building test facilities for high-speed rail. Understanding how we can actually use those to facilitate that and actually the business processes involved. How do you make sure that if that engine has a potential vibration that you've seen before that resulted in a fault 3 flights later, how do you ensure that you have a replacement engine or replacement part ready for that plane so that it is not delayed, because otherwise if it's delayed you have to compensate those passengers. And that analysis is happening in Derby, but the plane is landing in Singapore. The part might be made in China. So how do you make sure that part is in the right place at the right time? So just-in-time delivery, we're not talking about Amazon. Well, we are, but it's Amazon at a different scale. And no one wants to be delayed, but also no one wants to have a plane crash. So how do we manage that? How do we explore that? It's incredibly complex, and we're doing a lot of work in the space of logistics at the moment. And even that requires very specialist knowledge to understand where do you put a warehouse in the UK. The algorithms, unless you're an expert, if you use the default configuration, put most warehouses in the UK in the North Sea. Because the biggest port in Europe is Rotterdam. And therefore it uses a center of mass equation, which says we need to balance between the biggest ports and the biggest warehouses. Well, that's Netherlands, right, North Sea. Well, that doesn't quite work. Trucks don't float. Containers don't float. Well, they kind of do. They get washed up on the beaches in the Netherlands. We've seen plenty of examples of that over the last few months. That's a relatively simple example, but even that requires experts in the logistics field to come and collaborate with the mathematicians who are working out those algorithms or the people designing the software. So that really brings us to a very unique position here as a university and also as a spinner at this university to be able to work with Nexus and collaborate and say, right, there's some really great research happening here across so many different disciplines. How do we take that forward and really reinvent how the world operates? So at Slingshot Simulations, we have been working, all of that work, over £2 million of R&D, has gone into facilitate this concept, taking the power of cloud computing, really taking the power of AI and automation so that Joe Bloggs on the street can run what yesterday required a PhD to figure out how to run a simulation. So we've been working to facilitate the design of simulation where you can take your way of thinking, whether it's designing flowcharts or equations, not having to worry about how to write in Java, automatically deploy that across some cloud infrastructure that just exists. You don't care how Google works, you just hit search and you expect the result to come in a fraction of a second. And even though we can all remember when it actually took about a minute or two to happen, none of us have the patience anymore. We'd probably throw our phone or laptop out the window if we had to wait a minute. I know I probably would. Running that, analyzing it, designing then the optimization algorithms against that, and deploying those in the real world, testing them, and then repeating this process. So we in the School of Computing and Slingshot Simulations are really looking forward to taking this and really trying to reinvent the way simulation is done in a way that is easy to use and therefore allows you to do things faster in a more accessible way, democratizing how simulation is done. Here's an overview of the collaboration that's led to this point. You can see IMC's on there. We've been doing a lot of work in looking at how simulation can be used as a testbed for AI. You could almost call it simulation-based AI. Looking at how, for autonomous vehicles, you might be able to test the myriad of scenarios without actually building the real thing. Because you can't. How much money does it cost to build a car and crash it? Actually, it costs an awful lot, and you can't test every scenario. A great example is Jaguar Land Rover. In order to be able to test different road surfaces and be able to test the effect of it, they created a full digital using a LiDAR sensor at every particle of their racetracks, including their ice track in Sweden. This took months of work, and that was part of the big collaboration. Huge levels of data and detail to understand, well, actually, if we change the level of friction, if there's a few raindrops, suddenly the transformation of how that car behaves is really different. So in our lab, we've got a small version that was loaded in with one of those sensors. We got a small driving simulator, not the big one that they've got across the road. And I've been banned from being able to use a HoloLens or an Oculus Rift, because the thing that we test in that is what happens when you hit 130 miles an hour on a slightly damp road. And the answer is you spin out of control. So apparently, if you have a virtual reality headset with students visiting, it's not the best impression, because you need a bucket for them to vomit in at that speed. But it's a very simple example of what might happen. You're not going to try and do that with a professional driver. That's going to cost a bit too much, and you'll probably get sued. So I'm going to pretty much finish with this slide, because I think this encapsulates a lot of what we've been talking about, all three of us, looking at how we collaborate together. This really is a slide of looking at how everything feeds into each other. This really primarily focuses on simulation, as the world that I live in, but actually how you design these processes and how you analyze the data. I can build the best simulation in the world, but if you don't have experts like Alicia, experts like most of yourselves, it's absolutely useless, because it just doesn't work. AI will probably make some wrong assumptions, and then who's going to use it? So it requires collaboration. It requires us to work together to build these things, and today everyone's connected. We're all communicating, and we've got the compute power to do all of this. So actually, using the people in this room, we can really reinvent how the world works. And I think that's quite an exciting concept, and we're sort of going under a banner of an internet of simulation or internet of virtual things, where we can start playing with how these things interact and how they work in a virtual world which hopefully emulates as a digital twin of the real world, so that we can start playing around with those things without getting too much trouble. And hopefully we'll end up in a position where Leeds, not only having a great environment for collaboration, fintech and so forth, also becomes a real leader in digital technology in the UK. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll pass back over to Martin to take any questions. Thank you.
That's great. So if I can just invite Alicia and Barry back onto the so-called stage. So thank you initially. I think some fantastic presentations and very sort of thought-provoking as well in terms of some of the things that you've presented. So let me ask an initial question, but again, if you have a think as I'm asking this question, if there's something you'd like to ask, feel free to do that. So I'm fascinated in terms of, this is all about collaboration and how you drive collaboration between an academic environment and business. And obviously, you've each have slightly different perspectives on that. So perhaps just as an opening question, could I ask you, what do you think are the sort of key enablers to drive that collaboration? And perhaps, Barry, starting from more of a business, commercial perspective, and then perhaps working down with Alicia and David?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Martin? I was daydreaming a little bit. What, the key enablers?
Yeah, key enablers in terms of enablers that are going to enable that collaboration or drive that collaboration.
I think from my perspective as someone who clearly isn't particularly academic or isn't the CEO of a company, it's having that willingness and the spirit to actually be open to new experience and be open to conversation, recognising what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, and really kind of coming together and going for that interdisciplinary approach that David was alluding to before.
That's great, thank you. Alicia, from an academic perspective.
I'd say, I'm not sure whether that's the right word, but something like responsiveness. So being, like you say, being open to different perspectives and being able to respond and act on, let's say, the consensus decision. So you said open to different opinions. I'd say also be able to not just kind of take in different opinions, but also be able to respond and act on them.
Okay, thank you. David?
From both an academic and a startup spin out from the university. I say for us, at least over the last 2 years, there's a one-word answer, and that's someone like Barry. He knows everyone. Very, very useful. It's like, right, I need someone who knows someone in this area. Barry, who do you know? But actually that leads me to probably the biggest area that's facilitated a lot of the collaborations within the university, and I think somewhere where Nexus is going to make this a lot easier. I've spent the last 6.5 years making a point of pretty much having too many coffees in most of the cafes across campus, getting to know as many people as possible so that you can pull on the right person. There are thousands of academics and experts in niche areas. Even within my own school of computing, I don't have a clue what probably most of them do. And I still have to go around there trying to find, that's this niche area of AI that I hadn't thought about but actually solves my problem. So really the networking area, and I think Nexus is going to really transform that, and it's kind of scary how many people you bump into in here. It's also scary the amount of coffee I drink in here, but I need to bill you for that. It's good coffee. Yeah, it is pretty good coffee, yeah. When you're on first name basis with the people in the cafe, that's not a good point. So I think that actually the networking side is probably the biggest thing, and knowing that you don't necessarily have to be the one to answer the question, but then knowing where to point people to. So if in the case of maybe health research and computing, a lot of people might come to me, but I'm not necessarily the right person, and then actually knowing that you can pass that on. So I think that's been the biggest thing here within the school, but that probably applies across Leeds as well.
That's great, thank you, David. Any questions?
I'll speak up. Aimed both at the panel and also perhaps yourself, Martin, could you elaborate on the commercial model or models that really drive this process? I'm fascinated. These ideas are transformational, and therefore, if they're right, they will transform and they will generate a significant amount of success and wealth. And from the university standpoint, is that what you're seeking? Are you looking for recognition? Are you looking for wealth payback on the investment you're making? If you can elaborate on some of the commercial models that you go, I'd be fascinated to hear them.
Okay, that's great. And I've just been asked to repeat the question actually as well, just to make sure everybody... So really, you're asking very much about the commercial models and how those are going to drive the process and the collaboration and the value out of this. So shall I give you my response initially? So Nexus is very much around a vehicle, and it's to facilitate those collaborations. So as I mentioned, in the early days, it's about making sure that actually we can guide people around the university in the right way, because University of Leeds is a massive organisation, it's very decentralised, so actually getting and understanding who to talk to is actually the first challenge. So Nexus is designed to do that. In terms of the commercial sort of models, again, we're working very closely with our commercialisation and contracts group. So we won't necessarily drive totally new models, but what we will do is influence existing models. So our focus is very much around understanding the needs and how we can support the individual businesses. And then rather than jumping to a conclusion to say, oh, we've got to work together in this way, what we will do, and the engagement team, is actually challenge that to make sure that we get to a situation where it's mutually beneficial. So I think, in terms of creating new models, I think a lot of the infrastructure is there. It's about making sure that we get to the right solutions both for the company and the university, and we do that in a fairly quick way. And a lot of that is speaking about the same sort of language and being on the same page. So it's bridging that gap. I think ultimately there will be questions around if we run seminars or workshops where we're generating IP. Again, we will need to think about how we run those up front. And again, I've got there's ideas that we've got that we'll probably use to actually adapt that in a way which perhaps will be more flexible. So again, thinking about the bigger picture. Does that partly answer the question?
Do you see yourselves as long-term investors?
I think
In a financial capacity, I'm talking about.
no, so I think if you're looking at what we're doing here, this is very much long-term and driving research and innovation income for the university. So whatever form that takes, so that can be around collaborative research bids, all the way through to consulting, to driving more spin-out companies. We're not taking equity share in companies that are part of Nexus. So that's not something we're planning to do. In the future, that may be a model that we look at. Yeah. But it's all about those longer term partnerships that we're driving this. We're not in this for creating short term income.
You'll be pretty annoyed if Slingshot becomes very successful.
Yeah.
You don't take some stake.
Yeah. But again, that's not the initial model that we've got currently. And again, I think part of this is the university very much thinking about its role in the wider innovation ecosystem, which is the Leeds City region as well. And again, ensuring that we're working very closely with the LEP and Leeds City Council. Again, creating the right environment to grow startups and small SMEs.
So I'll add on to that as well, that one of the things, so obviously there's Nexus, and then beyond the Nexus team and this building, there's a whole big question around, there's some really great research that happens in this university, and how does that reach impact? Publications and papers is one. Licensing it to big corporates, patents, often forming part of a license deal, or spin-outs. That is probably at a very high level. There's going to be other niche categories and interesting patterns and configurations within that. That is how the university does it. So with Slingshot, we're a spin-out of the university, and with spin-outs, the university does take an equity position within it and does actually financially provide some support for spin-outs explicitly. Now, we're not the only thing that Nexus supports. So, IMC and Scaled Insights are a great example of another method of collaboration with knowledge transfer that's facilitated a lot of the stuff with Scaled Insights. So I think the real thing is, how do we facilitate getting the research that is happening in this university out to the general public or out to the corporates who can really generate real benefit, not necessarily just high impact papers, which are great and are an important step towards it. And I know I've published plenty of papers on the road to getting here, and the feedback and that really does help. But actually, in terms of getting something to someone, to Joe Blogs on the street, you need to be thinking more generally as well about what company, what organisation is going to take this and put it on the streets. Now, that could be that it impacts a government decision, that's its own route, and very much the publication and so forth. So I think there's a lot of different models. One of the things that we've seen, particularly in the spin-out community in the UK, universities at the moment, on average per year, spin out between 100 and 150 spin-outs from university research. Graduates spin out over 3,000. Now, and interestingly, a lot of those graduates are really deep tech, really interesting spin-outs, and have a much higher success rate than a lot of the academic ones. Now, we don't know why that is, and there's definitely a lot more research that can come out. Now, obviously, there's patents, there's a whole lot of other things that aren't accounted for in that statistic. But actually, as the UK, we need to be accelerating that and generating many more companies and licensing deals and patents, because actually, the UK is a pretty incredible place in terms of the home of technology. We just don't have any technology giants here, because we've all been bought. Amazon Alexa is a great example. That was a Cambridge startup, and now is in virtually every home. So how do we actually ensure that we're building British businesses that continue to grow and have a massive impact? Does anyone else want to add?
Any further questions? So let me ask another couple of questions then. So perhaps, Barry, I can just ask a question for you, as David's just very eloquently answered that question. So can I just ask about, clearly, Scaled Insights are working with a lot of collaborators. Are there, in an ideal world, are there additional partners that you would like to work with, and who are they?
So we've been working with some of the people in the cardiovascular clinical kind of team to try and formulate some kind of projects around using our AI. So I think we're really interested in continuing to explore that route. If we can, so we've signed an agreement, going back to that kind of commercial model, we've signed an agreement with the Teaching Hospital Trust, and if we're able to create predictive algorithms that we can then license on to other trusts or other countries, then part of that agreement is that the Teaching Hospital Trust will get a kickback. They will get some revenue share as a result of that. So yeah, I mean, we're obviously a company that wants to make profit, but we also want to make sure that the collaboration works for the Teaching Hospital Trust and of course the university as well. So yeah, so we're working with cardio people, we're working on some weight loss management stuff, really interested in problem gambling, alcohol, drug, anything where there's some kind of preventative measures that could be taken where that preventative measure is personalised and individualised. That's the kind of area that I'm particularly interested in kind of reaching out to the wider community at the university and doing more with.
That's great, thank you.
So I wondered if talk a little bit. Thank you. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about. So obviously there's services such as Nexus and staff across the university who are working to support collaborative relationships between business and academia. I wondered if you could perhaps talk a bit about some challenges you might have addressed in doing that and how people such as myself and people working in Nexus can help support that and help overcome those barriers.
That's a great question.
We had some really specific challenges setting up data studies with the university because we're a Canadian company. And until you kind of delve into it and go deep beyond it, then it was you wouldn't know that these things are there. So we had to make sure that because there's data, we had to make sure that the data didn't leave the university. It certainly wasn't able to be viewed by my colleagues in Canada, which presented one or two challenges, didn't it? Some late nights, you know, effectively playing postman between my colleagues in Canada and the people that are managing and looking after the data here. So that caused me some sleepless nights. So those are the kind of things that until you kind of embark on the journey, then we would have had no idea. Clearly, one thing that's interesting is that actually GDPR, obviously people say, oh, GDPR, have you thought about it? We absolutely have. And curiously, it was actually a Canadian lady who wrote the guidelines for GDPR. So even though Canada's this really open-minded liberal country, they've got really specific privacy laws that we don't necessarily have here. Like to a Canadian, if you was to ask Lisa what your turnover is at Overlap Associates, you'd probably think you wouldn't think I was being rude because we know each other, but you know, it's kind of not the done thing, is it? It's just not the question you ask. Whereas here, you know, you can look on a credit checking software on Company's House and it's all there. So it's those little kind of intricacies that you don't necessarily know until you start down the path, particularly between Canada and the UK. But working with Alicia and Vanya and Rosie and the team at Lyme at the Leeds Institute of Medical Education, we figured out a methodology how to make the project work and to meet the criteria of ethics approval committees.
If I can just briefly add to that, so that was for us a learning experience as well, because we kind of thought, fantastic, we'll just use the software from Canada, run a survey among our students, and somehow magically everything will be all right. And then once we actually started going through everything, the challenges became clear. The good news is once you've passed it, it's much easier. So we're doing a second study now, and it's pretty much repeat. So the curious thing is, I think, within the university itself, I'm sure other research groups had faced similar challenges, and I'm sure we could have actually learned from each other a bit more in terms of how that could have been set up. And I think one of the things that's still to come is the university cloud service, right? Azure, which I don't know if it's actually set up yet or ongoing. Yeah, because that could have been useful. We kind of had to set it up ourselves, but hopefully once that's live, that will solve quite a few problems like this about working with completely external companies, but still being able to kind of keep the data in-house and abide by data governance issues. Yeah.
That's great, thank you. Okay, any further questions?
I just wanted to add to what you were saying then. It sounds like you've got some really good stuff out of these early collaborations, and it's happening here in Nexus, so it's in place. What are you doing to catalogue that information, to retain that good stuff, so that it can be passed on to others in the future and they don't have to go through that learning curve again, so you facilitate this rapid growth?
Okay, so shall I answer that? There's a couple of things that we're doing. So one of the things is we're making sure that we've got the right impact metrics, and we're capturing those impact metrics from the organisations which are part of Nexus. And I think that's really important, so that as we start to nurture and grow companies, we've got the data to actually support case studies and to use that information powerfully. Some of that may be, we actually disclose that publicly on an anonymised basis, but other parts of that may be used to support grant bids and other things. So for me, it's about making sure we've got the right metrics and collecting the right data. I think the other element of it is, again, the best practice. And again, the engagement and collaboration teams that we have are capturing a lot of that information as well. So often they're actually saying, well, this worked with one company extremely well. Let's build upon that process or that approach and actually share it with another organisation. So we're starting to see that happen as well. The other thing which I think is really encouraging is we're starting to actually see members of Nexus, so different organisations and companies within Nexus, talk to each other directly. So we meet the introductions and then they start talking, and that leads to further collaborations or some quite interesting partnerships. Now, a number of those are at quite an early stage at the moment, but I think within 6 months or 9 months, they'll be at a point where we can use those as a case study, or we can share some of that. But that's a really great question. Thank you. So I'll just finish then by perhaps just asking one further question. And I guess it's around the research that each of you are doing. And I think it's really about what's the sort of the long-term vision of that. How do you see that impacting sort of the daily lives of somebody, if you like, on the street or in Leeds? So perhaps just a quick discussion about, or quick comments about how you see that. And Barry, do you want to start?
You go first. Let me think.
So that's actually a great question. So in the case of the Health Education England project, actually that was one of the kind of key things that this is already working with like the end user. So Health Education England is actually going to be delivering, and will be delivering training throughout the NHS. So as this project progresses, we actually will be making real world impact, because we will be, one of the next stages is actually running a study within the NHS. And once it progresses, we will be making real interventions, and ultimately, through better training in the NHS, we will be hopefully improving patient care as well. So I don't think impact gets any better than that.
No, I think it doesn't, so thank you.
Yeah, and I think exactly similar to what Alicia is saying there. If you think about problem gambling as an example, the one-size-fits-all nudge that the gambling charity and the gambling companies have come up with is, when the fun stops, stop. that's not going to stop someone who's got a problem with gambling to gamble, is it? Similarly, both my brother and I recently had the warning from the doctor that if you don't change your behaviour, your diet and your exercise habits, you're likely to get type 2 diabetes. It's in the family, so it's something that might happen. If we can be part of the solution to actually personalising the way that GPs communicate to you, or how that kind of message is presented to people, so it actually effectively stops them and helps them and motivates them to stop, I think that would be quite a good thing to be part of. It'd be nice to leave that kind of legacy behind.
That's great, thank you. David, so all the simulations you're doing, how are they going to impact a person on the street?
Simulation is quite a hard thing in some ways because most of it is business to business engagement, and hopefully in the simplest form it could be through maybe logistics, make deliveries more reliable. But more in a long term, we're really envisaging a world where we're talking about digital twins, where there's data connected, data being shared. So hopefully it means we're in a world where we actually trust that we can get into an autonomous vehicle and it will take us to where we need to on time and safely. And that is probably the biggest vision. At a more simple level, and actually touching on a piece of research that the Institute for Transport Studies is actually doing as well, is maybe try and work out and simulate what's the healthiest way to get to work. And it's not cycling through Leeds. It's actually the unhealthiest way to get to work at rush hour, because you're cycling behind buses that are emitting so much nitrous oxide that you're breathing it in, you're actually knocking many years off your life. Walking isn't particularly good either because you're walking past all the traffic. Cars aren't particularly good either unless it's a very big car, because it's in a small enclosed space. The gas doesn't have space to escape. Turns out buses are the healthiest way. Actually understanding that, and that obviously affects which route you go through. I mean, it was recently reported Leeds has, I think, 3 of the top 5 worst polluted streets outside of London. And I drive through all of them on my way into work, which isn't great. And I can't get around them because it will add about half an hour to my commute, because I have to go all the way around Leeds to come back in. But that could be a very simple application of understanding how would that impact it. But really, simulation is a bit more out there up in the sky, so it has much more implication on how it affects other things that get delivered to your door.
That's great, thank you. So I would just like to take this opportunity just to thank our speakers, so Barry, Alicia and David. I think you agree with me, they've been excellent speakers, some really thought-provoking topics were discussed. So can we just thank them again? And I would also just like to thank you for attending the Festival of Ideas and attending this plenary session. And just to remind you, we have a wine reception outside, which will start now. So you're almost welcome to attend that. But again, thank you very much.